Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Incessantly Seeking. Today, I have Arian Samouie, who is here with us to discuss the art of manifestation. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's jump right in. I'm sure our audience is so excited and really on the edge of their seats, trying to understand how do we manifest the life that we want.
Well, obviously, it's not very black and white in so many ways. It's always good to understand. One of the things I do is I teach you how you work, as you are everything. You've heard it many times. You are everything. You are not in the universe. You're expanding out your own version of the universe. To get to the simplest form, essentially, your external world is a mirror reflection of your inner world. And your inner world is a very much so in regards to your upbringing. It's the story that you've been told that has created for you in so many ways. And it's what we believe. What we believe about ourselves and reality is what we see.
I have so many questions. And that's for sure. I watched a video as we were talking a little bit before we started recording, that our reality is we were born and they give us a name and we identify by that name because we hear it over and over again. And we're born into the family we're born into. And we see people who are able to change that for themselves and just create a whole nother reality. And there's people who cannot. And I would love to hear more about that, about how can we heal ourselves into the new reality that we want to be participating in.
It's a it's exactly how we would do it. You hear a lot about, oh, just think these thoughts and just focus on this. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily how we work. And that is not to say that that won't work for a certain thing to come into your reality or for a certain way. But like you said, then it's more going towards healing yourself to be able to get the reality that you want. In terms of what we should call it, I've really taken a step back from calling it necessarily healing yourself, even though I talk about healing a lot. It's more about understanding how I work. So, for example, my beliefs are what's creating my reality. You've heard the term all the time, your thoughts create your reality. That's not actually the case. It's actually your beliefs. It's just your beliefs use thoughts. So, we've got a belief system, and that belief system can be used for anything. When we talk about the belief system, we tend to think like, okay, well, what I believe about myself or religion that I believe in or something. But you can believe anything about anything. For example, if I have a TV on my wall and I have a thought that it's going to fall off the wall, but I don't really believe that it's going to fall off the wall, it won't fall off the wall. But if I truly believe it, because I've obsessively either thought about it or for whatever reason, that's when the belief system kicks in. And that's when the TV will fall off the wall because that's what I'm manifesting. So we also have beliefs about ourselves through the experiences that we've had, no matter what they are. It has taken us to a place of having unconscious or conscious beliefs about ourselves. And these beliefs might be, I'm not good enough. I'm unloved. Everyone always leaves me. I've been rejected. I'm not worthy. And just like having a belief where the TV is going to fall off the wall and then the TV falls off the wall, if I truly believe that I'm not good enough in my reality, it will show me how I'm not good enough. It will attract to me the certain type of people that will mirror anything in any way that will show me that I'm not good enough. So if I have a belief that I'm not worthy enough and this is why people abandon me, then the people that will come into my life are the type of people that will abandon me because that's what's creating our reality. It's my belief system. My belief system is creating my reality, and it does so by using thoughts.
And is it also like if you believe something, then you taking subconscious action towards that coming into reality? Because I think about that too, is like, some of our beliefs are so ingrained or so subconscious that we don't wake up and think, I don't deserve love, but it's there. And I think for me personally, doing somatic work, I have uncovered those things that I didn't realize were there. And I did this one experience here in California called the Hoffman process, and during that experience, they throw you a birthday party, and it was really sweet. It was like a kid's birthday party. We had cake and cookies and candy and like little toys and balloons and all that stuff. And I walked into that room and I felt like a kid, and I just started crying, like
Yeah.
hysterically crying. And people were like, "Why are you crying?" And it was the realization of like, I don't think anyone has ever put so much effort into a birthday party for me ever before.
Yeah.
Like nothing about my parents. I mean, they were struggling, like working class people, and I had birthday celebrations in the backyard with the friends or the cake or whatever. But it was the realization no one has spent the time ever in my entire life to prepare something just because they wanted me to have a good like experience of feeling special and loved. And that was something I didn't know. So it made me think of how many other actions in my life I had taken because I didn't really internally believe that I deserved that care, that I deserved that specialty.
Most of your beliefs are unconscious to you. Most of these parts of ourselves, we are ecosystems. You are not one part, you are multiple parts. Everyone has multiple personalities. This is how humans work. We call it a multiple personality disorder when it's really out of control for someone, but everyone works like this. And all of these parts that are unconscious to you have been made unconscious by you in moments where you had to protect yourself. It was how you protected yourself. And that was either because what they were feeling or what they were going through at the moment, at the time, was too much. It was way too overwhelming, and you had to protect yourself by rejecting that experience, rejecting that part of you. Or it could be because you've learned that by being this part of me, the people around me that I rely on for my survival reject this part of me. So I need to abandon this part of me and behave in a way that is deemed acceptable by everyone around me in order to conform and be accepted. And we reject these parts of ourselves. And these are the parts of ourselves that give energy and carry these beliefs. Now, we could be conscious of this as well, but there are hundreds, if not thousands, of parts of ourselves that we are completely unaware of. And this is why we do shadow work. Shadow work is to go into the human shadow. The human shadow is the unconscious part of ourselves. That's why it's called shadow work. It's got nothing to do with darkness or evil stuff or anything like that. It's called shadow work because where the work we do is we go to the part of ourselves we are unconscious of. This is why the term as well is to bring it to the light of consciousness. I need to go into the shadow, the place I'm unconscious of, and bring these parts of myself to the light of my awareness, my consciousness. Now, in terms of experiences that we've had, it's obviously things that were done to us or the experiences we've had play a huge role, but it's mostly through what wasn't done for you. That's the really, that's the part. And this is why there's an epidemic of emotional neglect in the world today. And I always say that we live in the emotional dark ages, is because there is, it's, it's kind of like, um, it's unseen. The things that don't happen to people is unseen. It's very easy to see abuse happening, but what doesn't happen to you is also very, very traumatic in so many ways. And trauma doesn't necessarily mean like uh, only these big things that happen to you, like a death in the family, a form of sexual abuse, or a car crash, or any sort of accident. Trauma is actually a very normal thing in terms of how a human being deals with a situation. But unfortunately, collectively as human beings, we've not been taught how we work emotionally and how to be there for each other in an emotionally healthy way. And because of that, there are a lot of things that don't happen to us, which is what will lead us to giving these unconscious meanings about ourselves. And these meanings are thoughts. And the meanings that I give these thoughts over and over again then become a belief. I believe that the reason that people don't put a lot of effort into my birthday is because I'm not worth it. I get like the bare minimum. I'll get a present here, a present there, and oh, they're busy. I can't do it. But by the things that haven't happened to me, I give meaning to that. And again, I talk a lot about our experiences and what we've been through and our caregivers and everything, but I never say any of these things to suggest that anyone is a bad person, that our caregivers are bad people. We don't know what we don't know. Our caregivers didn't know. We don't know. Everyone does the best with what they have, the amount of knowledge that they have. And this is why I spend my time, and why my mission and purpose in this lifetime is to teach people about this stuff, is because we live in a time where it's completely, we don't collectively understand this.
And I really love this idea of a emotional epidemic, because I see that a lot, especially post pandemic, the way that people have been just reacting to that collective trauma, but also jumping into so many life decisions during and after that seemed erratic, because we exactly haven't learned how to just self integrate in general. And I agree with you in terms of our caregivers, because I think as a whole human race, we never really gave a lot of attention to emotion, right? Like the psychological field is now very becoming very popular because we are seeing a mental health crisis, but I love this emotional health crisis because it's really what's happening. But when you look at it historically, you realize we haven't known much about the human psyche for very long. And right?
Yeah. Therapy was only accepted, I think, in the 70s.
Yeah, and
You talk about human history, how short is that time?
and then
Where
you add culture to it, and how each culture is an integral part of who you believe you are, right? I grew up in Brazil, and there's the whole machista thing. There's a whole we don't do therapy, which is something that I inherently grew up with. And maybe if I was still living there, I would still abide by those things. But my parents didn't know that kids could be traumatized by not having a birthday cake. Like, they were trying to just put food on the table and like survive their adult also traumas. But my mother was an orphan, and now that I've been doing this work, this somatic work, to understand where my complex traumas are, and I start to realize where hers are, and like her whole life story is I'm not wanted. And I started to figure it out, like, why is she saying that when she's 70? Like, that she was an orphan at like 5. But when you realize that that was the story that was reinforced to her until today, she is creating these situations in which she's putting herself as the outsider. And it's not like she's not the unwanted, but it's like she's not welcoming people to be there.
absolutely. And this is it all comes to knowledge and education. This is why, again, I can concentrate on just teaching. Um, and you're absolutely right. Myself, it's the same. My background is I come from Iran, and I was born into a culture in a time where you talk about emotions, and it was like, no, you completely like just shut up. Like, you don't even talk about that. Don't even mention it. It means nothing. But it's how we work. We are emotional beings that think. We are not thinking beings that feel emotions. Every single decision, every single decision a human being makes is because of how it makes them feel. Even if I want my family to be safe, if I want my family to be safe, it's because it makes me feel peace, it makes me feel calm. But when they're not safe, then I feel anger, I feel fear, I can't relax. And obviously, yes, the logical side is, but I want them to be safe. Yeah, of course. But it's still of how it makes me feel. Any decision that any human being makes is because of how it makes them feel. And then we all chase happiness and we chase it externally from us. But even the people that aren't into the path of healing or, becoming aware, they're still chasing happiness. They're still making decisions based on how it makes them feel. No one willingly let's say, who's aware of themselves in terms of being able to choose going towards the direction of happiness. No one doesn't want to feel good. And even though contrast exists in this reality, and life is not about continuously being happy, it's not why we're here. It's not what a human experience is. There's contrast. But we still want to be happy and we don't necessarily want to feel the undesirable emotions, but then we still reject emotions. It's like, well, hang on, if you're rejecting emotions, you're still, every decision you make is still based on how you feel emotionally. So it's about kind of like going, oh yeah, the more and more, like I'm a man that was brought up in the Iranian culture and then the English culture. Both cultures, especially for a man, teaches you not to be emotional, teaches you to be strong and don't cry, and big boys don't cry. So there's a lot of rejecting emotions, and on my path of learning about all of this and realizing just how important it is, I remember there was this one moment where I went, hang on, because I used to feel a lot of shame about not just being emotional, but talking about emotions. And I was like, well, if I talk about this kind of content and this, and there was this one moment where I was like, hang on, it's just how I work. All I'm talking about is how I work. If I talk about shame, if I talk about vulnerability, if I talk about crying, if I talk about love, and someone else looks at that and thinks anything, obviously that's a reflection of themselves. But what I'm doing is purely talking about how we work. That's it. In this reality, this is how a human being works. And the human being, you know stretching all the way from the conscious driver, which is the soul, which is the you, the true you, the real you, all the way down to the actual human being, it's how we work. And when I realized that, I was like, oh yeah, and that allowed me to just be so much more open, because it doesn't matter, right? If you have shame with what I'm saying or what you're hearing, that's a communication for you. So understand that you have a wound around that based with shame, because that's how you work.
And I love what you said about the mirror, because that's why I've been doing this podcast as well. And being vulnerable is hard. There's been a lot of shame as well from the culture that I was raised in. And as being a woman, it's like the flip side of that, right? Oh, you have to be proper and you have to be dainty and you have to be quiet. And those are the things that you grew up with. And then you like try to break through that. And how do you do that, right? Because that's not who I identify as, but it has been what I was told that I should be. And that alone creates so much confusion. But once we start talking about these things, it allows for other people to exactly identify what their wounds are and realize like, oh, my tears are the same as their tears, and like how they feel is how I'm feeling. And then this whole collection of now we're no longer alone. I think it's part of the purpose of doing this kind of work. But I love what you said in one of your videos about this love hunger that is kind of like being in the desert and being given water and food. And you eat that very differently than if you would have it every day. And I'd love to discuss that. How do we end up in these cycles of really lack instead of realizing how abundant life can be?
Um, yeah, it's so the video that you're referencing is where I talk about the term too needy doesn't exist. Now, we are creatures of need, but when someone says to someone else, you're too needy, they're not understanding what's actually going on. And the reason I say it's too needy doesn't exist, I use the example of, we all have needs. We have needs of food and water, and connection is as important for a human being for their survival as food and water is. And what is going on is we live in a reality, in a world that we live in the emotional dark ages. We live in a time where we just don't understand this collectively. So we're bringing children up in a way that's not emotionally healthy in so many different ways. And again, not blaming and not suggesting anyone's bad for it. It's just the time we live in, and we have to live in reality in order to be able to change it. Now, what happens is we grow up and we have a lot of unmet needs. And the example that I gave about the desert was, if someone is, let's say you and I are sat down in front of each other having something to eat, and I bring pasta to the table. And because we both had lunch earlier, for dinner, we sit down and we're very talking to each other and just like, hey, so how's your day been? And what you been up to? And we'll drink our water and we'll just have a chat. Now, if I'd walked the desert for 6 days, only surviving from drinking urine from my pants, and then I find a house and I'm like, oh my God, I'm saved. And then someone puts a plate of pasta in front of me, the way I'm going to eat that pasta is vastly different to the way you and I were sat down on a table eating. I'd be like shoving it in my mouth, drinking the water, asking for more water, asking for more food. The reason my behavior would be so different in that moment versus when you and I were sat down eating is because the need I have for food and water is so much higher. And that dictates my behavior because that's my survival. Now, when we are brought up in an environment where the people in our lives don't know how to meet our needs in a healthy way, and we've never learned how to meet needs ourselves, then we are going through life getting the scraps of connection that we can. And we do this by abandoning ourselves, abandoning what we like, what we want, what we believe, what we think is right, what we think is wrong, anything. And we get to a place where we've been walking the emotional desert all our lives, or for years, or for a long time. And then one day, something will happen where I will have a reaction, the same type of reaction as if I was like to shove that food in my mouth. And that reaction to someone else seems like, oh, you're being too needy. And it's like, no, I'm just starving of the love, the connection, the relationship, the vulnerability, the safety that I've not had my entire life. I am starving of that. Because when you learn how to start giving that to yourself, your behavior changes. The reason, if you're someone, and this was me, so I was the anxious attachment, and I used to abandon myself a lot in relationships, which is what the anxious attachment does in so many ways. And I would abandon my own needs, abandon my own wants, abandon my own desires, and my behavior would be aligned with that in a certain way. And I would be like, yeah, sure, all right, do this. And I'd be terrified because of the experiences that I've had, because I've learned not to make anyone else upset, make sure that they're all happy. So I would abandon my own needs and what I believe and what I'm okay with, my own boundaries because of that. But then when you start meeting these needs within yourself, the parts of you that have learned to abandon yourself in order for the other person to kind of be okay with what you're saying or give you the slightest bit of connection or anything, then you get to a place where you're like, you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm meeting that need myself. So no, I'm gonna not abandon myself in this moment. I'm gonna speak up. I'm gonna say what I want to say. And you know what? If it doesn't work, then I'm gonna move on. And the reason why we can get there is because of the needs that we have learned to meet. So by meeting those needs, it dictates how I behave, how my reaction to things are, what I actually decide to do, what my path is. Just the same way as if you and I were sat down on a table and we had lunch earlier, we had dinner the night before and lunch, the day before and everything, our behaviors would be completely different.
I would love to hear from the avoidant attachment style. So, from this perspective, what would that signify for people who are avoidant?
So the avoidant attachment style is the most common relationship dynamics in the world is the anxious attachment with the avoidant attachment. And essentially, they're both wounded, but they're very different wounds. The avoidant has learnt that love is unsafe, has learnt that the people in their lives abandon them most of the time by pushing them away, most of the time by sending them away. It's the avoidant, and this is what actually happens as well, especially in a relationship. If you have like the anxious attachment and the avoidant attachment, more often than not, what happens is, let's say the anxious attachment wounds are triggered. And what happens in that moment is the anxious attachment will pull closer in, will go closer in and need that closeness. But then the avoidant has learned that that closeness is unsafe. So then the avoidant pulls away, which then triggers the anxious attachment more, pulls in. Then that triggers the avoidant. So it's kind of like this chase. And this is what actually happened to me. And more often than not, in a relationship with these two dynamics, and the reason it usually breaks up and one person is always chasing the other is because of that. But it's very much so about understanding yourself. There's, from my experience and the people that I've worked with, uh, it's not uncommon that you would have traits of one attachment style and also another attachment style as well.
And one thing that came up for me in this discussion is when you said you have to live in reality to be able to change it. Because I hear a lot about in this creating a reality, a manifestation of just believe or just see it or, oh, visualize it. I would love to discuss visualizing because I think about my life as a child and I had a very difficult upbringing. So visualizing to me was the way to escape it. So I was very good at it as a child. I was like, oh, yeah, anything is possible. It never had a sense of it's unattainable. But now as an adult, sometimes I find myself struggling with imagining or visualizing a different reality because I know how much it takes to get to that or how hard things have been in the past to achieve it. How do we break that? And is that the way to really change a reality? Is one, we are aware of the things that we believe, and then what do we do?
It's a So this is the thing. This reality has its rules and it has its ways that it works. Like you just said, if I focus on this, then I achieve it. But do I have to? I have to always, from the moment I wake up to the moment I sleep, focus on this, and that is draining in so many different ways. So it's not like there are so many ways to like hack reality to a certain degree. And this is it. And this is why like I really, really, there's so much information out there that's unfortunately very unhelpful in terms of, you see a lot of YouTube videos like, hey, if you want to get this, all you got to do is think this and think this and think this. And it's like, okay. And then that could come into your reality, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to stay in your reality. It's about understanding how your reality works. Visualization is very, very powerful. It's very helpful. And it's something that I actually have in one of my meditations. It's something that is very, very good. You should definitely use visualization throughout your journey. But it's kind of like affirmations. I always talk about affirmations. Affirmations on their own just don't work. You know, yes, obviously depending on what part of the journey you're on and everything, but it's completely ridiculous to tell someone to just say to yourself that you're loved and you love yourself when they don't. It's the most, it's one of the biggest gaslights that we can do to ourselves. And the reason of this is because you are many, many parts. You are hundreds, if not thousands of parts. And there are so many of these parts that are rejected, that we've had to reject. And when we reject them, we put them somewhere we're not conscious of, which is our subconscious, which is the human shadow. Shadow work is to go in the human shadow to bring to light bring to light of your consciousness the unconscious parts of you. So if my conscious side, which is about 5% of my thinking, of my being, and you've got like about 90-95% is the unconscious, subconscious part of myself. So 5% of me is going, I am loved. I am loved. I am loved. 95% is like, no, I'm not. Like, who's going to win that battle? Like, you're not going to outthink yourself. It's just not necessarily going to work in that sense. So, what we need to do is uh, we need to do both or multiple things at the same time. So, if I'm doing visualization, I will do visualization to learn and get deep into how that reality that I want feels, because how how I feel in my human being is what's drawing that reality to me. But at the same time as that practice, I'm also becoming aware of the parts of myself that don't believe I'm good enough for that reality, that don't believe that that reality is possible, because my belief system is what's creating my reality. So I'll do the visualization in order to create these new beliefs in my belief system that it's already happened, that I'm in it, which will then bring it into my reality. But if I just do visualizations, then I'm doing a little bit of visualization, and then the rest of me are like, no, don't like that, not going to happen. Now, obviously, this isn't as black and white in terms of, other people will like have a different level of belief that they're not good enough, let's say, or they're unworthy than other people. So it's not like, oh, you have to continue, everyone has to do this. Of course, there are people that will have a higher self esteem about themselves that may be able to kind of get to certain realities easier or quicker, or however you want to say it. But it's all a mirror of yourself, it's a mirror of your internal world. My internal world doesn't feel right when I look in the mirror and say, I love myself, then that's feedback to me. My entire reality is feedback. Your emotions are communication, it's a feedback. You never, ever, ever, ever feel wrong. It's because whenever you have a thought that, I'm going to achieve this thing that I want to, and then it doesn't feel right to you, that's a communication. Oh, okay. So there's some parts of me that believe that I'm not good enough for that. Everything is a communication, even jealousy. Jealousy is a communication. Jealousy is telling you what you want, but you don't believe you're good enough to get.
Mm.
Everything is a communication to you in reality.
Or you're not good enough to keep. because you might
Oh, you're not.
lose the thing that was so hard to get. And a question I have about that too is like narcissists, right? I've had an experience, unfortunately, dating one of those people, and he would verbally say to me things like, "I hate myself. I'm a piece of shit," which is so scary. But it's somebody who is highly successful. So on outwardly, it seems to have all this confidence, is loud, and it's the life of the party, and is able to reach levels of manifestation that I haven't seen in people who have actual self-esteem. And why does that happen? Are they gaslighting themselves into believing that they can do it, or are they just so desperate for any kind of validation that they won't quit until they get something that outwardly shows them that they are worthy?
It's everything. It's
Mm.
it's kind of like you got to look at it a different lens. Like, you know, first of all, I don't know if I never call anyone a narcissist because they have narcissistic behavioral traits based on their wounds, based on their experiences. Anyone who we would deem as a narcissist can also get to a place where they're healed enough to not be classed as a narcissist or deemed as a narcissist. So if someone had a narcissistic behavioral trait, even if someone doesn't necessarily love themselves, they can believe that they can achieve something.
Mm.
Remember, it's your belief system. This is why a lot of people who have created a lot of wealth may not necessarily have love. So I don't love myself enough to have that reflected in my reality, but I believe that I can succeed in my business, and I believe what I do can get me the wealth that I want. Everything's your belief system. So if you've been brought up in a world to believe that if you work hard, then you will get what you want, and that belief is so strong that it can overpower other beliefs, then that is what will come into your reality if you work hard. But everything is a permission slip in this reality. Everything, doesn't matter what it is. The type of healing you do, the way Reiki works, going to someone with Reiki to allow them to manipulate this energy and do everything that they do. Whenever you get a card reading, all of these are permission slips.
Mm.
Everything is you. So let's use the example of like card reading. If I go to someone and I get a card reading, what I'm doing in that moment is I'm giving that person um, the act of this is a permission slip for me to be able to communicate and connect with the universe. And I'm allowing that message to come through that person. So everything in reality is part of you. And it's how I believe. If I believe that that is the way that the universe is going to communicate to me, it will. My belief system is what's creating this reality. And I'm using that as a permission slip to do that.
And that I love that you brought this up, because as this year specifically has been so chaotic, I think, for a lot of people, I have had more and more of my friends come to me and say, "Oh, I went to this fortune teller," or "I had this reading done and she got all these things right." And I said, "Okay, sure, sign me up. Let me go and talk to these people." And I've spoke to two different people who don't know each other, and they told me very similar things. And I remember walking out and thinking, eyes kind of like watery and thinking, whoa, is this really working? Because like they don't know each other. Maybe one could have looked me up by my phone number and first name. The other one just randomly happened to meet me in this sound bath event I went to. And the actual predictions were similar. But then they always say, this is based on the choices you make now and they can also change.
Yeah, our reality is constantly changing. We're going through, that you hear about multiple realities. You're going through realities a billion times a second. It's constant. It's continuous. This is what we use time for. Time is not what it's not linear. It's not what we believe it is necessarily. Time is what we use to go from realities, and we're going through billions a second. And based on our beliefs, based on what we observe, how we feel necessarily, because that's what's pulling in the realities as well. We're kind of steering, because manifestation is always on. It's not like, hey, I'm going to manifest tonight. It's like I'm going to focus on steering my manifestation, but it's continuously on. It's like gravity. Like gravity never turns off. Manifestation is exactly the same. You don't like, oh, I'm not going to manifest tonight. Like, no, you are. You are. By your beliefs, by your thoughts, what you give attention to, everything constantly, you are. You're constantly manifesting. So if you're believing that, oh yeah, well, I believe in this, therefore that's a great way for the communication that I need to come through. And also, everything in your existence is a communication to you. I really need you to hear me. Like everything, me right now, for you is a communication to you. You right now for me is a communication to me. In So I've been pulled back, and I've seen reality many different ways and many different forms and many different stages. And one of the things that I saw that there's nothing here. Like it's complete and utter blackness. There's nothingness. And I was presented like the consciousness, which is what I am, which is what you are, as kind of like this hand looking thing. And it's just my perception of it. It's all energy, but it was a way for me to understand and see. And then everything expands out of us. So you're not in the universe, you're expanding out your own expression, your own version of the universe. And everything is a communication, a feedback. You can get a feedback from everything. You can learn anything about everything. There's never a limitation of anything you can learn about something. We'll be like, well, what about a coffee table? You can learn as much as you can about a coffee table. You'll reach a point. No, you won't. Like you can, all right, let's see, you've learned everything about a coffee table. Okay, what about if the coffee table's on a wall? What if it's on a ceiling? What if it's in a temperature like this? What if it's on this part of a house like this? What if it's in this type of reality? What if it's in this other type of reality? Like there's nothing that you can ever stop learning about. Everything is data, everything is feedback. Your being is a feedback. When I feel emotions, it's a feedback. If I feel fear, it's because it's trying to protect me. If a car comes at me 90 mile an hour, I will feel fear, and that fear will get me to jump out of the way. That fear is telling me that there's a warning, there's something here that's dangerous. When I feel shame, it's the same. When I feel anger, it's the same. It's all a feedback. Your entire reality, when you walk down the road and someone stops you and just talks to you, that's the universe talking to you. When you go to your friends and converse and everything, that's the universe talking to you. When you look uh, over a mountaintop or out in sea or over a river and you start becoming aware of things, that's the universe talking to you. When you go to get your card read because you believe it so much, that's the universe talking to you. Constantly, the universe is talking to you in your reality.
And I have a follow up question on that because it has happened to me recently when I'm so focused on manifesting something. It's like the work and the grind and what are the steps I need to take to get to that place. And then I get so burned out. And I just take a day and say, you know what? Today I'm just going to sit at the beach or I'm going to go to the pool. I'm just going to read a book. And then everything happens, everything manifests. Why is that? That the moment it seems like we take our hands off the wheels, there it is.
It's I've experienced that as well. It kind of made me go like, why?
I know.
There is a level of frustration, but it, it's the way it works as well. Your The best way to kind of think of it is like you've got your physical mind and then your higher mind. Your physical mind isn't responsible for creating. It's really not. Your physical mind is kind of responsible for experiencing. But when your physical mind starts to try and create, it kind of interrupts a little bit of what's actually happened. And I know that can sound contradictory because it's like, well, you said you should visualize and you should like, yeah, absolutely. But this is kind of like deeper um, into what we're talking about here. The reason why it just comes in is because you're letting go of how it should happen. You're letting go of like what you're going to be okay with and what you're not going to be okay with. You know, the universe, you've heard the term as well, like the universe is always working for me. Everything's always working for me. Well, what does that look like? Well, if I have a job and then my manager pulls me in and then says we're gonna let you go next month. It's like how is that the universe working for me? Like that's insane. Now I've lost my job and I need to stress out and everything. But then just the day before things really hit the fan, you get a break and you get the job that you actually wanted. That's because that's the quickest way of getting that to you. It doesn't seem like that. You're like, "Oh my god, what's going on?" It's like, "Well, it's the quickest way." All right, well, if I'm in a relationship and I want this person to truly love me for me, I want to be loved for me. It's like, "But this person can't do that." So, I'm gonna end the relationship and then I'm gonna bring someone else in for you. It's like, but in the ending of a relationship, it's like, "What? How is this working for me? I feel terrible. I feel so bad. I feel so sad." It's like, well, that's the way things are. I can't Everyone has free will. I can't make someone love you when they don't have the ability to love you.
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's like, how do you know, right? How do you know that you're making the right decision when it comes to these relationships? Because sometimes it feels so different than the ones before. Like, to be more specific, I just ended a relationship and it's the best ending of a relationship I've ever had. It was so conscious, it was so loving, it was so caring. But it was a conscious decision like, okay, maybe we're going different paths right now in what we want for our lives. And before we let the relationship deteriorate, maybe we should just be friends, and I was very sad and I cried and I thought the exact same thing that you're just saying today. The universe is talking, which is like, well, am I making the right decision? Like, I really care for this person. This is a different relationship that I've experienced in the past. Look at how much love and care and that we have shared. But yeah, sometimes when it's not exactly the direction you're going, you have to let go of these things. And when I woke up this morning continuously thinking about it, I thought, you have to let go of where you're at to get to where you want to be.
Absolutely. Um, I would visit what I mean by the right decision, you know, because essentially that's quite subjective. One person's right will be completely different to another person's right. Um, and always question like that with yourself. Like, so let's use the example of a relationship. Am I making the right decision by leaving this relationship? If I'm festering with that question so much, why am I festering? If I said to you, like, let's say you really love and you need to have tomatoes in your life, yeah, and then you have one tomato, right? And there's a tomato, there's a tomato scarce. Like, it's very hard to get tomatoes, like in life. It's really, really hard. And I say to you, all right, give that tomato up. But like the stores don't have tomatoes, it's very, very hard to find it. It'd be very hard for you to be like, oh, okay. It's like I need tomatoes, but it's very, very hard to get it. But then let's use another scenario. Let's say if you had those tomatoes but the stores had so many tomatoes and constantly everywhere, and I was like, give that tomato, you can be like, all right, yeah, sure, here you go, I'll go get another one. It's kind of like, if I'm festering too much with have I made the right decision, it's because there are beliefs that I'm like, oh well, I won't be able to find anyone else. Oh well, maybe I'm making the wrong decision because we always talk about like twin flames and soulmates, and yes, that is true. And at a certain level, everyone is a soulmate because everyone, we are all one, we are all source. But yes, at this level as well, and twin flames, there's so much information out there that I just very, very much disagree with in terms of twin flame, because to suggest that you're not understanding your value and your worth if you believe that this one human being on a planet with 8 billion human beings is the one for you. You're just not understanding your value and worth. You're not. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be with someone you want to be with. But if you're concerned and you're festering with that question, you need to do a bit of like, all right, well, why am I as concerned? Doesn't mean it's a wrong question to have, and doesn't mean you shouldn't ask it and, do the exploration. But if I'm not able to actually move on and go like, no, it's okay. The store has more tomatoes.
Yeah, and I love that you said that because it's exactly what I've been thinking is like, why am I holding on to this if I felt like it was the right thing to, just for the fact that we want different things for the future, and we should all have the future that we want to have. And I think as we go through dating, I see a lot of guys saying things like, oh, if I meet the right person, I'll know. I'm not sure if I want a family, but maybe if I have the right person, I will. And I avoid meeting those people because for me, it's like, well, I will have what I will have regardless if it's with you. But if you're telling me that this is not what you want, then you're already eliminating yourself from, me being your partner because that's not the future that I see. And that's what I'm looking for in everybody that is in my life. Like, what is your vision for your future? Does it match mine? And then we can go towards that direction together, be it as a friend, as a business partner, or a romantic relationship. But I'm seeing a lot of those people who are just kind of like, I don't know, I guess I'll know it when I see it.
Well, honestly, what you're also doing there is what you observe, how you are, what your beliefs are, your self concept is huge. Is you're communicating to the universe. You're saying, this is not acceptable. Don't bring me people that don't match me. Because if I stayed with someone that doesn't match me, then I'm telling the universe, that's okay. That's acceptable. But as hard as it is, or as challenging or whatever, if if you're not compatible with someone and you get to the stage where you're finally kind of like, no, moving on, you're giving a big signal out to the universe that bring me someone that I want, and that will happen.
Yeah. And beyond this like spiritual realm, everybody's so familiar with the research of Brene Brown. And that's the number one thing that she came out with on her research is that if you believe you deserve it, you get it. And people who don't get it is because they intrinsically don't believe they deserve it. And that is really interesting, just in general.
It is, and it's a. I did a video in regards to essentially how to achieve anything you want, because it's the same thing and the same concept. The only difference between people that achieve what they want and people that don't is because the people that do believe that they can. The
Right.
people that don't believe that they can't.
Yeah.
And that's honestly at the core of it, that's the only difference. And you can be like, well, no, I'm busy. I do this, then I get it. I'm not telling you to kill yourself and beat yourself down to do whatever you want or anything. I'm just letting you know that we've heard it many times, spoken by many people. The only person you're in competition with is yourself. The
Right.
only person that you're against is yourself. And when you get to a place of realizing that you're not actually against yourself, you shouldn't be against yourself in terms of rejecting parts of yourself is what's creating all of this. When you shift that to learning how to accept yourself, learning how to bring these parts of yourself in and accept them and love them the way that they need, then that's when you like start your reality just shifts immensely.
Wow. I mean, I can't believe we've been chatting for almost an hour. I feel like we barely touched on the topic. And Arian, I loved having you. Thank you so much for all your expertise. I'd love to have you back and deep dive into with the shadow work that you talked about. I think it deserves its own episode. But please tell us where we can find you if we want to work with you, if we want to follow your content.
Well, thank you very much for having me. So everything that I do is I've got a YouTube channel, but you can find everything from my website. My website is ariansamouie.com. Um, it's That's my handle on all social media platforms as well.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.